2022 is over, and that can only mean one thing, that it's time to look back at the year and to give you, in my own personal opinion, my top 10 horror films of 2022. Two quick things to say first before we get started. Number one is that this list is based, like I've said, totally on my own opinion. I'm not saying that these are the most important or objectively the best films of the year, I'm saying they're the ones that I've personally enjoyed the most. And number two, looking back through this list, some of these picks might be a little bit iffy as to are they legitimately horror films or not. There's at least 2 or 3 cases, I think, where there's definitely arguments to be made that the films that I've picked might not be totally, in the strictest sense, horror films, but I don't really care cause it's my list and what I say goes.
I'm the boss!
So with that said, let's get this fucking thing started. I have sweated away hundreds of hours of my life watching some absolute horse shit this year. But that does not mean that there haven't been some absolute crackers, and this is, after an entire year of sifting through the shit, the absolute best of the bunch, in my opinion. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty chuffed with it, to be honest. Number 10, The Vampiress of Barcelona. Starting off with our first Spanish film on this list, The Vampiress of Barcelona is a very grim and nasty film, but is also incredibly stylish and inventive, and it's based loosely on a real historical case from the early 1900s. Enriqueta Martí, the so-called Vampiress of Barcelona, was a woman who's believed to be sort of like a local witch, who kidnapped a load of children who then all later turned up missing body parts and having been drained of all their blood, so that when she was eventually caught, she got nicknamed, of course, the Vampiress of Barcelona. We follow this jaded, morphine-addicted journalist who gets dragged into investigating the case of these missing children, and as he does, he uncovers something that's far more chilling than a vampire. Soon he's fighting to expose a deeply corrupt secret society where the rich and powerful of the city indulge their darkest vices. As you might guess, this is a pretty dark and harrowing film, however, it's also incredibly twisty and well put together with a great deal of passion and style. It looks absolutely beautiful, using colours very inventively whenever we see blood on the screen, or to contrast the opulent decadence of the sinister kind of inner sanctum scenes with the soul-crushingly bleak colourlessness of those Victorian city streets. There's also, bizarrely, a really wonderfully emotional opera scene that's one of the saddest and most poignant scenes of the year for me, and the acting all round is just exceptionally intense and very, very committed. But the real heart of this film is that it's a story that's told with a kind of righteous anger that I think is missing from a lot of films these days. A story where the real vampirism in question is the rich sucking dry the hopes and dreams of the impoverished working classes, reducing them to just these expendable playthings to toil away their lives for their pleasures. And to be honest, I am a real sucker for that sort of story. Poignant, beautifully designed with a real love for just cinema itself and an eye for a really, really striking image, Vampiress of Barcelona is one I've heard pretty much nobody talking about this year, but it has really stuck in my head as one of the most powerful films of the year. Do be warned though, it is really, really bleak and it's got some pretty unsavoury scenes dealing with child abuse, but if you're willing to strap yourself in for a harrowing experience, then this is just a really fantastic film. So from Spain, we now move to Poland for the next film on this list, and we're going from a really bleak, nightmarish film to an even bleaker, even more nightmarish film. Because at number 9, we've got Hellhole from director Bartosz Kowalski. This might win the award for having the most appropriately descriptive title of the year, because this is one of those films that really gives you that feeling of just being plunged into hell itself. It's the story of a young policeman who goes undercover in a monastery, where he uncovers a load of really horrible and disgusting things going on within its walls, culminating in what has got to be, in my humble opinion, the most phenomenal ending of any film all year. If you've seen Hellhole, you'll know exactly what I mean, and I promise I'm not going to spoil that ending here, but it is really fucking incredible. Very light on dialogue and very dark on its visuals, this is one of those films you can practically smell and taste. It's got a real grubby, grimy, unsavoury feel to it, and it's jammed full of tons of really horrible, gag-inducing little moments that just keep getting more and more unpleasant as the sense of unease and realisation builds and builds, one horrible, slimy lump of gristle at a time. It's one of those films that's a real mood piece, and it manages to create this sense of being totally trapped and isolated in this inescapable hellhole where the darkness is closing in on you at all times. There's one particular shot especially, very near the end, a long single take where a particular character wakes up and finds themselves somewhere impossibly horrible. And it's one of those scenes this year that really, really unsettled me. It just had this really profoundly unnerving effect that I can't quite fully describe or explain, other than to say that it just kind of got under my skin and creeped the shit out of me. I just know that, right from the start, this is a film that manages to make you feel like you're never safe, where things just keep slowly building and getting more and more intense and stomach-churning and horrifying, until you think it can't get any more intense, until bam, it finally hits you with that beaut of an ending. It's absolute perfection. A lot of big-name horror directors made films in 2022, but definitely one of the coolest comebacks of the year was the return of David Cronenberg and his much-anticipated Crimes of the Future, which is coming in at number 8 on this list. Less of a horror film and more of an explicit sci-fi cautionary tale about a future devoid of art and originality, Crimes of the Future is just pure Cronenberg goodness. I absolutely love Cronenberg's films, and though I think on the whole, fans seem to want maybe something splashier and more visceral from this than they ultimately got, Crimes of the Future for me is one of the few films of the year that I actually think works best because it's genuinely saying something that's relevant to today about the corporatization of individuality and art. In a year when we've had about 100 Disney films and shows and garbage, intellectually bankrupt blockbusters just cluttering up the entertainment industry. It's a film that's old-fashioned in all the right ways, coming off almost like more of a stage play at times because it's driven by its characters and by its dialogue, rather than just being a load of flashy set pieces strung together. It moves at its own pace and it explores its ideas in an intelligent, organic way, rather than just sitting down and lecturing you. And I think that this is easily one of the most thought-provoking and unique films of the year, that gets more and more interesting the more you think about it. If you have seen it once and you didn't much care for it, I definitely recommend you just give it another chance, just in case, because, like a lot of Cronenberg's films, it benefits from multiple viewings and a chance to get used to its own particular speed and rhythms. Throw in brilliant performances from Cronenberg's BFF Viggo Mortensen, who's always terrific, and a memorably twitchy turn from Kirsten Stewart, who I think still, after all these years, gets a bit of a bad rep from her days as being that soppy girl from Twilight, but who's actually a really fantastic actress in her own right. As well as, of course, a brilliantly, unpredictably futuristic soundtrack from the always phenomenal Howard Shore, and I think it's difficult to ignore just what a fantastic piece of work Crimes of the Future is. Let's just hope, though, that we don't need to wait another 10 fucking years for the next David Cronenberg film, though. Make it soon, okay? Now, Crimes of the Future may be objectively a better, more intelligent and thought-provoking film on the whole, but I would be lying if I said that I didn't have a much better time with this next film on the list, which is one of the biggest surprises of the year for me, a film I didn't know I needed until I saw it. Because, at number 7 on this list, it's Orphan First Kill. A lot of people I know remember 2009's original Orphan very fondly, and I definitely think it's pretty good as well. Whatever else you thought about it though, chances are you were never thinking that it was a film that was crying out to have a prequel made. In fact, prequels on the whole are almost always entirely redundant exercises. However, Orphan First Kill is hugely entertaining for a number of reasons. It works totally well as a film in its own right, but is also pretty much a textbook example of how to reverse engineer a prequel, picking out key elements from the original film and the original character, and using them as the building blocks to tell a new story that isn't just a rehash of basically the same story done over, but is instead a taut thriller that flips things around and shows us events through the eyes of the orphan herself, Lena Klammer. By doing this, Lena becomes an infinitely more fascinating character, layered and complex and conflicted. She's self-destructive and consumed by longing. She's frustrated by the quirk of nature that's left her trapped as a grown woman in a child's body. The original Orphan was a cool but pretty standard killer-child story that had a very famous twist. First Kill is a well-plotted, twisty thriller that's unafraid of just being a full-blooded genre film. But what it all really comes down to, what really makes this film work so well and makes it so special, is the performance of Isabelle Fuhrman as Lena. Because she makes the character her own and clearly is honoured to be playing her once more, holding the screen and giving a totally committed performance that I think genuinely earns Isabelle Fuhrman a place as one of the 21st century horror's true great icons. Every second that she's on screen, you totally believe in her character's struggles and emotions, and that's why for me, even after a fourth watch, you're not just sitting there noticing all the child doubles that are used for certain shots, or fixating on the technical jiggery-pokery that's used to put her on screen in frame with other actors, because Isabelle Fuhrman's performance is just so wonderful. First Kill is a great horror blockbuster, and at a time when so many of those big franchise films involve beloved characters being mercilessly dispatched or disrespected, it's nice to see a film that actually adds to the legacy of a great screen horror icon and treats an iconic character with love and with respect. It's also just a hell of a lot of fun, which is something that's a lot rarer than it should be these days, and to be honest, that counts for a lot. There's a reason this is the film that I rewatched more than anything else, and that's because it's just a real blast. So I mean, here's the thing. Horror can mean a lot of different things, and in a lot of cases you come across films that are sort of horror, sort of not. So, to be honest, there's a strong case that this next pick, well, it's not strictly speaking a horror film, and yet it deals with a lot more horror ideas and concepts than a lot of this year's actual inarguably horror films. So, fuck it. At number 6 is a film that goes by the name of XXXHolic. That's right, this is a live-action adaptation of a Japanese manga series that's since been adapted into an anime, a live-action miniseries, novels and all the rest of it. It's a supernatural, fantasy, maybe slightly horror story about a young student named Kimihiro who's plagued by the fact that he can see demons all around him that appear just to him. He's about to commit suicide when he suddenly finds himself drawn into a strange alternate dimension where he meets a woman called Yuko, who it turns out has got the power to grant wishes, but she will do so at a price. Kimihiro ends up working for her, fighting his suicidal urges as he gets drawn deeper into a world of spirits and demons, and where eventually he has to fight for his very soul against the forces of darkness. Now, I know that the title of this makes it sound like it might be a porno, but I can promise you it isn't. Because a more accurate translation of the title, XXX Holic, or Holic as it's apparently more commonly known and pronounced, would probably be something along the lines of ... holic, as in fill in the blank holic, meaning the main theme of this film and the manga before it is different kinds of addictions. The central idea of this wish-granting shop is basically your classic kind of Twilight Zone dark fantasy idea. A way of telling stories about philosophical ideas or telling character stories about people dealing with their own personal demons or issues, but using this really wonderfully, colourfully Japanese fantastical setting to do so. Now, I've never had any dealings with any holic stories in the past. I know nothing about any of it. Maybe, if you're a super fan of the anime or whatever, you might have your own gripes with this as being an adaptation of something that you love, but coming in cold, all I know is that this is a film that really, really gripped me, with a beautiful, swirling visual opulence to it. Its themes are big and sweeping: good against evil, temptation, duty, finding your place in a world that seems devoid of all meaning, and finding a sense of purpose. Its emotions are huge and wonderful and infectious, and it's hard not to get caught up in this great, big, ambitious, dimension-hopping story of a troubled young man looking for meaning in a chaotic world. In a year of just grey, brown, sludgily minimalistic folk horror and repressed mumblecore nihilism, Holic is like someone pouring an effervescent rainbow directly into your brain, and as well as looking absolutely beautiful, is also just good-natured and human and joyful and intelligent, wonderfully acted, with a gorgeous surging soundtrack and imagination to spare. Is it a horror film? Maybe not. Is it a great, dark fantasy genre film? Absolutely. Is it my 6th favourite film of 2022? Hell yeah. So at number 5 on this list comes my favourite Spanish horror movie of the year, and that is a film by the name of Venecia Frenia from director Alex de la Iglesias.
You're kidding. No one's seen that movie.
This is a film that's absolutely dripping with atmosphere and packed full of gorgeous eye-popping visuals, set as it is in glorious Venice at the height of its carnival season. What starts off looking like a pretty basic kind of Hostel rip-off, a group of tourists rock up to the floating city in search of a good time, get invited to an exclusive do, and then wake up the next morning to find out that one of their number has gone missing, pretty quickly evolves into a magnificently elegant and epic giallo with twists and turns to spare. The few reviews I've seen of this one tend to sort of mischaracterise it as being a slasher film, and though those elements are there to a certain extent, there's a lot more going on than just simple gore and mayhem. The themes of Venecia Frenia essentially revolve around the exploitation of Venice by its mass tourist industry, and the trivialisation of its history by wave upon wave of crass, irreverent foreigners who look upon Venice as being little more than just another Disneyland or Las Vegas, instead of being an actual real place with a real genuine history. And what we get is essentially the citizens of Venice rising up and striking back against the tourists. The wonderful costume designs in this really play up the theatricality and grandeur of Venice itself. The main villain struts this jet black plague doctor outfit, appropriate here because there's a lot of talk about the tourists themselves being seen as the plague that needs to be disposed of. Cosimo Fusco is a wonderful, brooding, rumbling presence as the Doctor, whilst the character of Rigoletto, the psychopath in this dirty, filthy gestures costume, is responsible for many of the film's coolest moments, and he's a fantastically dangerous and volatile screen presence, easily one of my favourite characters of the year. In fact, he could easily have just made this a slasher film about his character alone. He's certainly striking enough for that, but the fact that there's so much else going on besides just his scenes are what helps broaden Venetia Frenia out into being a much bigger and more ambitious epic. Right up until the very last shot, Venetia Frenia is playing a really clever game, stringing along a very well put together, tense, twisty mystery thriller with moments of explosive violence every now and then that always are impactful and always have a point. And when it comes right down to it, I think that the ending in particular is just absolutely brilliant. I have seen some people get kind of pissed off at the end just because it's doing something that's quite bold and unpredictable, but it's not just a rug pull for its own sake. It totally makes sense in the context of what this film is all about and what it's trying to say. Big and exciting, full of wonderful locations and costumes, incredibly striking and dramatic, absolutely dripping with atmosphere, superbly paced from start to finish, and with a real heart and sense of purpose, Venetia Frenia earns itself a place in the top 5 of the year. It really is a class act. At number 4 on this list comes the obligatory Ti West film of the year. I say obligatory because pretty much every list of the best films of the year that I've seen so far has had at least one Ti West film on it, and to be honest, that's pretty impressive. So, at number 4, not just the best Ti West film of the year, but I think we've got the best film that Ti West has ever made, and that is, of course, Pearl. Just in case you don't know, the deal this year was that Ti West, director of films like The Innkeepers and House of the Devil, made this 70s throwback slasher exploitation film called X, about a bunch of people who go to a farmhouse to shoot a porno and end up getting slaughtered. Along with X, Ti West also made, back-to-back with it using the same locations and the same star, a prequel which was called Pearl. Both films starred Maya Goth, but Pearl was also written by Maya Goth, and the difference is, in my opinion, vast. What's strange is that I've seen a lot of people lump Pearl and X together, as though they form a whole that they're best enjoyed as a single experience, when I actually think that they're very, very different films. To me, X was a lot more of a clinical, much more kind of technical exercise about creating a product that had a certain look and feel to it, recreating that 70s aesthetic, but without ever fully understanding it on an emotional level. I didn't hate X by any means, I actually quite enjoyed it, but Pearl is leaps and bounds ahead of it. The difference is simple: characters and emotion. I never cared remotely for anybody in X, whereas, right from the start, Pearl is a complex emotional character study where you care for just about everyone on screen, and you're drawn into Maya Goth's performance, you feel her desires, get a real sense of the horrors of her own world. You're engaged straight away, and the technical side of things you appreciate almost subconsciously, which I think is the way that cinema's supposed to work. If you're just sitting there admiring a film on a purely technical level, then I think that means that it's missing something very, very important. It's also, instead of just being a nihilistic exploitation splodge, a really interesting take on a particular movie trope of the country girl who dreams of escaping to the city to become a movie star. Here, you get to see the realities of that dream, of somebody giving up all emotional responsibilities in a rather stark and cruel way. Because Pearl isn't just an innocent girl with dreams, she's got a dark side to her, and what she really wants is to escape the burden of her family, and indeed to escape from ultimately reality itself, and to not have to care about anybody but herself. She's really a strange and disturbed character, but Maya Goth manages to make her absolutely fascinating to watch from start to finish, whether she's dancing around joyfully, silently sitting and thinking, or having sex with a scarecrow. In fact, I'd almost go so far as to say that it's the best performance of the year. That was until I saw another film, a film called You Won't Be Alone. Now, I'll be the first to admit it. This is the only film on this list that when it first came out, I just really didn't fancy checking it out. A gloomy looking 110-minute folk horror film set in a 19th century Macedonian mountain village. To me, that sounds like the absolute peak of ponderous, pretentious piffle. But it was seeing it crop up on quite a few other best of the year lists that finally made me think, you know what, let's give it a shot. And believe me, I am so glad I did. Because it really is, and I'm going to strip away my own subjectivity for 1 second here to say, one of the absolute best films of the year. Told in a very strange expressionistic way, You Won't Be Alone is the story of a young girl taken from her parents as a baby and transformed into a shape-shifting witch, before then being left to fend for herself in a strange and unfamiliar world. And this is one of those films where you almost forget that you're watching a film entirely, where all kind of cinematic artifice has been stripped away and it's like you're just gazing into some strange window onto a totally different time and place. It's a film of genuine magic and wonder, about exploring the joys and terrors of what it means to be human. Its lead character speaking with these strange, almost alien turns of phrase to describe the way she responds to the world. At first, she's overwhelmed by its many sensations when she first leaves the cave that she's been kept in by her witch mother, before she then becomes curious and fascinated by the nuances of human and animal interactions around her, before, eventually, she uses her powers to assume the forms of others she comes across, in an attempt to learn what it actually means to be human. You Won't Be Alone is one of those rare films that genuinely is totally flawless in the way it presents its world, so real and physical in every tiny little detail. There's so many beautiful, sad and tender moments in it throughout, quiet, strange little captured moments of our lead character touching or feeling something, or just looking at something in a totally unique way that just feel totally natural and authentic. Somehow, I don't think there'll ever be another film quite like this, and that's exactly the way it should be, but it's just a genuinely magical experience. And of course, as I said before, this film features without question the best performance of the year for me. Not as I was expecting Noomi Rapace, who I think is brilliant, but actually Sarah Klamoska, who is just utter perfection throughout. Some people think that great acting means whizzing about shouting and crying and delivering monologues and emoting for all you're worth. The real test of a great performance, in my opinion, is being totally convinced that you're watching someone inhabit the skin of their character, that you never get a sense that you're watching an actor at work, and Sarah Klamoska delivers that in spades, a really understated but totally convincing performance that's at the heart of this film, never anything less than totally, wonderfully magical. In actual fact, I think perhaps if I had to make a list of just objectively the 10 best made horror films of the year, this would probably be number 1, only because my next two choices I admit are much more personal and are films that I enjoyed more myself. For the longest time, I was convinced that this next film on this list was going to be my number 1 film of 2022 because when I watched it, I was really just completely captivated by its strange, uniquely seductive charms. It's a film that comes from, quite honestly, probably one of my favourite directors of the 21st century, a genuine visionary by the name of Peter Strickland. Because at number 2 on this list, we've got a film that goes by the name of Flux Gourmet, which, for the record, isn't really much of a horror film either. But it's enough of one to count, so let's lay this out. Just like any other truly imaginative filmmaker, like David Lynch or David Cronenberg, the best way to describe a Peter Strickland film is to say that it's like a Peter Strickland film. It's a very particular experience that you'll either really be in tune with or else be totally turned off by. Me, I just absolutely love Peter Strickland's films because there's just nothing else out there that's quite like the stuff that he makes. Flux Gourmet, therefore, is just prime, full-on Peter Strickland, a film about a bunch of strange people engaging in incredibly ritualistic behaviour in a strange, airtight environment with its own set of rules and laws of reality, which were dropped into at the start of the film and then left to wallow in for the next 2 hours. Flux Gourmet takes that same kind of microcosmic approach of Berberian Sound Studio or The Duke of Burgundy, and it tells a story about essentially artistic freedom, about this bunch of odd, pretentious arty types, all wrestling with their own strange problems, competing egos, just full of wonderful flowery dialogue and exquisitely surrealist set piece after set piece. Flux Gourmet is, for someone like me that just loves Strickland's work, everything that you could hope for. An exquisite tumble down a strange and wonderful rabbit hole of the flamboyantly absurd that couldn't have come from any other mind working in the film industry today. And that's why there's a great deal of space in Flux Gourmet devoted to characters arguing about whether or not to take notes, to change their art on the arbitrary whims of the purse string holders or not. Because Peter Strickland's films make the best possible argument for staying true to your own personal artistic vision, and to hell with what anybody else thinks. Because it's hard to ever imagine a studio greenlighting a film that's this strange and individual and impenetrable, that seems to offer so little mass appeal for a casual audience, that refuses to smooth any of its rough edges or to compromise any of its strange scatological imagery, and it's just happy to be exactly what Peter Strickland wants it to be. And that's why, when you watch Flux Gourmet, you'll realise that there's still room for genuine creativity and individuality in today's genre filmmaking. So, whether you love Flux Gourmet or not, the truth is that nobody else can make films like this, and that is just the way that it should be. And that's also why, for the longest time, I was convinced that this was going to be the #1 film of the year for me, because it exemplifies everything that I want from a film, because it's such a rich and wonderful and seductive film experience. But then Hellraiser came out. Yep, it just had to be. The new Hellraiser film is, without a doubt, my favourite new horror film released in 2022. It just absolutely blew me away, maybe in part because I never really thought it was going to live up to all the expectations that I had for it going in. Hellraiser 1 and 2 are just some of my very favourite horror films, both perfect 10 out of 10s for me. Those films are both hugely important to me, they're just a key part of my DNA as a horror fan. So maybe I'm just totally biased about this, but believe me, nobody expected a new Hellraiser film to be more disappointing than me. But right from that brilliant opening, from the gorgeous stylish direction to the beautifully doom-laden music, I knew that this was going to be incredible. Now, I've tried to describe exactly what it is that works about this so well for me, and I think what it really comes down to is that it just nails the tone exactly. It's totally 100% deadly serious. There's nothing kitsch or jokey or self-referential about this. It's a film that totally believes in itself, in just the power of Clive Barker's ideas, but it's also never beholden to or constrained by what's come before it. I think the best way to describe this for me is to say that watching this Hellraiser film was like seeing Christopher Nolan's Batman films. It wasn't just this cynical studio revamp, but a reimagining that felt like someone coming along, looking at something that was in a pretty poor state of repair, and seeing in it that thing that fans have always been able to see in it, that thing that makes it so special for them, and to translate that core love into a big, beautiful finished product, where every little idea and tweak evidences the love and care and respect that's gone into making it. It still amazes me, in fact, that someone could come along today, in today's filmmaking world, take a property like Hellraiser, which has always been a hard one to sell to a mass audience for its twisted and kinky themes, and just do it this well, and with such absolute conviction and confidence in the subject matter. It's a great big 2-hour-long adrenaline-charged horror epic that blasts along from start to finish without an inch of fat on it, every shot dripping with sumptuously dark imagery, drawing you into this wonderfully simple but superbly put together story. In fact, I'd go so far as to say, I don't think there's a single misstep in this entire reimagining of the franchise. From Ben Lovett's incredible new reimagining of the Christopher Young score, to Jamie Clayton's already iconic performance as our new Pinhead, for every idea that gets recycled from Clive Barker's original, there's another new twist or wrinkle or concept that's just totally original. David Bruckner, who's a director whose work I've never really got on with before this, to be honest, has made, in my opinion, the biggest, best, and most entertaining horror film of the year, without doubt. In fact, when I reviewed it when it first came out, I said it's not just the best horror film of the year, but it's also one of my favourite horror films of the last decade, and I am quite happy to stand by that. For me, this is 2022's only perfect 10 out of 10. A phenomenal, phenomenal film that gave me everything I wanted and then some. And on that note, that is finally the end of this year's top 10 list. Hope you've had a good time. Chances are you've probably lost the will to live by now. I know I have. But the good news is that 2022 is finally over now, which means that it's time to do this all over again. 365 more days of fucking absolute torture. Don't know about you, I cannot fucking wait. So we'll see you again, this time next year.